Despite being conquered by Islam, the Persian peoples, known today as Iranians, maintained certain traditions distinct from the majority of the world's Muslims. This includes their own form of Islam called Shiaism, as well as aspects of their language and culture. In essence, their customs and traditions merged as a unique Iranian Islamic identity. In fact, going back to the 7th century AD onwards, the Islamization of Persia yielded deep transformations where it could be argued benefited Islam more than vice versa. This is because prior to this event there was already a blossoming Persian heritage, whether it be literature, philosophy, science, medicine, or art. Thus Islam, and by extension the Arab Muslims, tapped into this deep cultural, scientific, and political structure by integrating a heritage of 1,000 years of civilization, which eventually became major elements of the newly forming Muslim civilization. Some of this is mentioned in these research papers. More evidence will be presented in the course of this video, as well as it being covered in the book Islam, the Honest Truth. In the Cambridge History of Iran, Volume 4, within the preface, Professor at Harvard Richard Nelson Fry says, quote, Islam was rescued from a narrow Bedouin outlook and Bedouin Moors primarily by the Iranians, who showed that Islam, both as a religion and primarily as a culture, need not be bound solely to the Arabic language and Arab norms of behavior. Instead, Islam was to become a universal religion and culture open to all people. This, I believe, was a fundamental contribution of the Iranians to Islam. End quote. Prominent Princeton scholar of Islam, Professor Bernard Lewis, writes in his book that Iran re-emerged as a separate, different, and distinctive element within Islam, eventually adding a new element even to Islam itself, culturally, politically, and most remarkable of all, even religiously. The Iranian contribution to this new Islamic civilization is of immense importance, and he continues. George Sarton, another influential scholar and historian who was professor of history of science at Harvard, he is considered to be the founder of the discipline of the history of science as an independent field of study. An award known as the George Sarton Medal is the most prestigious award on the subject. On pages 28 to 29 in the Incubation of Western Culture in the Middle East, in a lecture delivered by him in 1950, gives a historical perspective on Arabic/Islamic science, claiming that the development of Arabic science did not begin until the late 8th century AD, therefore it had nothing to do with Muhammad or his immediate successors. This is contrary to modern Muslim apologists' claim, where credit is given for this advancement to the emergence of Islam in the 7th century. He posits the reason why it really flourished, especially during the 9th century, was due to the Persians. As George Sarton puts it on page 29, Arabic science was the fruit of Semitic genius fertilized by the Iranian genius. In this book by Arabic and Middle Eastern Studies scholar Dr. Hamilton Gibb, who is professor at both Oxford and Harvard universities and editor of the Encyclopedia of Islam, says that the Persians had a great influence on their conquerors, that the caliphs adopted many of their administrative practices such as coinage, the office of minister, and the concept of the diwan, which is a bureaucratic system for collecting taxes and giving state stipends to the needy, He goes on to say that the Persians themselves largely became the administrators due to their proficiency in this regard, to the point that the Abbasid caliphs modelled their administration on that of the Persians. The caliphs adopted their court dress and ceremonies. Even the architecture, which is often viewed as Islamic, was borrowed heavily from Persian architecture. For example, from page 10 onwards, he mentions that the Abbasid Caliphate's operations were based upon its alliance with the Persian nobles. He also references the Shu'ubiyya, the name given to the Persians who opposed the privileged status of Arabs whilst they lived and conquered Persia. Bertold Spuler, professor of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies, as well as of Semitic languages at various universities in Germany, such as Hamburg, where he remained until his retirement in 1980, quotes an Abbasid caliph on page 52 of his book, saying, "The Persians ruled for 1,000 years and did not need us Arabs even for a day. We have been ruling for 1 or 2 centuries and cannot do without them for an hour." Early Muslim biographer Ibn an-Nadim, in his encyclopedia Kitab al-Fihrist, mentions a long list of pre-Islamic books, some of which were Persian, that were still available until the 10th century, a period that marked the flourishing Abbasid Caliphate's so-called Golden Age because of the scientific and cultural advancements. A point not covered enough or given much credit by Muslim apologists is the importance of pre-Islamic Persian knowledge, and that much of the scientific achievements of the Islamic Golden Age was built on pre-existing scientific achievements from the Persian Empire, which it absorbed from others such as the Greeks and Indians. In other words, the Persian Golden Age came before the Islamic Golden Age, and the latter was a continuation of the former. Here is an excerpt where he talks about Abu Sahal from the 10th century, who went on to become one of Islam's greatest geometers, in addition to the reference made of the books being discovered during this time. With the foregoing in mind, it should not be of any surprise that many early Muslim scholars were of Persian descent. Some of the greatest scientists, not just for the Muslim world, but for the whole of humanity, whether they be physicians, astronomers, logicians, mathematicians, philosophers, and scientists, were from Persia. Here are just some examples. Al-Khwarizmi was a polymath and known as the father of algebra. Abu Bakr al-Razi, known as Razis in the West, was widely regarded as one of the most important figures in the history of medicine. He also wrote on logic, astronomy, and grammar. Al-Farabi was known as the second teacher after Aristotle for his influential work in philosophy and logic. Buzjani made significant contributions to trigonometry and spherical geometry. Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West, was a preeminent philosopher and physician. Al-Biruni was given the appellation father of comparative religion and the world's first anthropologist. Umar Khayyam was known for his contributions to mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and literature. At-Tusi, widely regarded as one of the greatest scientists of medieval Islam, he is considered to be the creator of trigonometry as a mathematical discipline in its own right. He was also proficient in many other areas such as logic and religion. Kamal ad-Din al-Farisi made major contributions to mathematics on light and number theory. Even after the advent of Islam, due to Persia's deep tradition of learning, many important scholars of the major Islamic sects and schools of thought were Persian. These include the most notable hadith collectors from the Shia and Sunni worlds. Islam's greatest theologians, whose influence is still impacted today, were also of Persian heritage. This ranges from Abu Hanifa, whose school of jurisprudence dominates the Muslim world today. At-Tabari, known for his historical works and expertise in Quranic exegesis, his works has influenced Islamic thought for centuries. Al-Ghazali heavily influenced Islamic thought by integrating philosophy, theology, and mysticism. Fakhruddin al-Razi is famous for his Quranic exegesis called Tafsir al-Kabir. He was also known by the sobriquet the Sultan of the Theologians. Az-Zamakhshari, a major theologian, linguist, poet, grammarian, and Quranic commentator. Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, a preacher and Sufi mystic leader who was the eponym of the Qadiriyya, one of the oldest Sufi orders. And Rumi, a jurist, poet, and one of the leading luminaries and the most influential figure of Sufism. His spiritual legacy transcends boundaries and ethnicities. He is revered from Iran to Turkey, from Afghanistan to the Indian subcontinent. As the centuries progressed, eventually the emergence of Persian Muslim dynasties had a great effect on championing the religion of Islam in its spread. In so doing, they managed to keep their distinct Persian culture, societal norms, literature, and unique Islamic identity. As Professor Hussein Nasir puts it, most of the Muslim lands of Asia have been Islamized through the intermediary of a Persian form of Islam. The reason why the Persian influence is not widely known or even cared to be known, especially amongst the Arab Muslims, is because there came a period of whitewashing by turning anything non-Arab into Arab. This is covered more in detail in this book by Professor Horting. Just by way of an example, he mentions how early Muslim rulers gradually moved from native languages such as Persian to Arabic, so much so that the prevalence of the Persian language in the tax registers and the official language of the conquered lands were replaced with Arabic. Thus the distinction between Persian and Arab became increasingly blurred. Anything Persian was downplayed because all that was said to matter was that they were Muslims. Incidentally, some of the major scientists who are being claimed as Muslims today were described as heretics and non-Muslims by major Muslim theologians of their time. This is covered in the book Islam, the Honest Truth. Anyway, clearly this did matter to the Persians because from the 9th century, as a reaction to the whitewashing of their culture and heritage, and as a response to the growing Arabization and Islamization, the non-Arab subjects, such as the Persians, created the Shu'ubiyya movement in response to the privileged status of the Arabs and the demoting of Persians to second-class citizens. The movement was primarily concerned with preserving Persian culture and protecting its identity. The legacy of this movement is still seen today in the preservation of its language. So in conclusion, at the crossroads of major cultural highways, at the forefront was Persia, which significantly contributed to the emerging Muslim civilization of what culminated in the Islamic Golden Age. Whether the Arabs had more influence on the Persians or the Persians on the Arabs is debatable, but with the foregoing in mind, it is difficult to argue against the proposition that the Persians influenced Islam and the Arabs more than the other way around. This is because even after Islam, although Persians eventually adopted the religion of their Arab conquerors, over the centuries they worked hard to protect and revive their distinctive identity, language, and culture. In so doing, Persian scholars and scientists shaped the known world. Therefore, the Persian impact on the Arabs and Islam should never be underestimated or ever downplayed.